When we gather to celebrate and commemorate Absalom Jones, we are not only simply celebrating one very special man, one remarkable priest, one saint. We gather virtually today to commemorate not only him, but also the community of which he was a part and from which he derived. Absalom Jones did not just appear one day in Philadelphia. Unlike Father Divine, he wasn't combusted on 125th Street. Absalom was born part of a community of people of African descent, and more specifically, of all those of African descent who were enslaved in North America, who endured slavery, dreamed of freedom in their lifetimes, but for the most part died enslaved. When we lose our memory, we lose the ability to know both where and when we are. Our orientation is made possible, defined by memory. When we have no memory, we become disoriented. When I try to explain the importance of history to young people, I ask them to engage in an exercise, a role play of losing their memory. They are asked to all pretend that they cannot remember anything. They quickly understand that they are not able to answer questions like, what day is this? Or what room or building are you in? And then I tell them that I have not lost my memory. And they begin to ask me those questions. And I answer with inaccuracies, with lies. They realize that theirs is not only a disorientation of time and place, it is a disorientation of recognizing truth and falsehood. This is the dangerousness of amnesia. History is our corporate memory. It is the memory of our individual existence incorporated into the memories of others' existence, alive and passed away, who we read about. If it is not known, if it is forgotten, lost, stolen, or strayed, we suffer from corporate amnesia. We lose our memory, we lose the ability to know both where and when we are. Our orientation is made possible, defined by memory. When we have no corporate memory, we become disoriented as a people, as a community, as a nation. And as in the role play, we may not know when we are being lied to. Theologians have a fancy word for the opposite of amnesia. It is a word for recalling, recollecting, remembering what is most important. It is anamnesis, the most important memories. For the Jews, their anamnesis is the Exodus, slavery in Egypt, and the Passover. For us, it is the passion, resurrection, and ascension of Christ, what we remember every time we hear and read the Eucharist. Do this for the remembrance of me. Our original story as Americans cannot be accurately told without telling the story of slavery. The story of slavery is an opportunity to cure our amnesia and consider the opportunities of a corporate, national, cultural anamnesis. This recalling will not be an easy exploration. To become our anamnesis, we must tell the truth. Slavery and the slave trade in the Americas existed longer than emancipation and civil rights has yet existed. If you use 1619 as the approximate date of the introduction of slavery in the North American British colonies, which became part of the United States, slavery lasted for 246 years. It will not be until 2111 that people of African descent will have been free as long as they have been enslaved in the United States. Even in Haiti, the Dominican Republic, on Hispaniola, as the Spaniards called that island, where the first successful revolt against slavery occurred, slavery lasted about 285 years. It will be 2085 before Haitians and Dominicans of African descent will have been free as long as they have been enslaved. I'll leave it to those of you who are descended from enslaved people in other countries and islands in the Americas to do your own calculations. But I would ask you to please wait until I finish. To move from the myth of slavery as an incidental occurrence in the early days of the European occupation of the Americas to the truth of slavery as part of the truth of the origins of the nations of the Americas, and specifically of the origins and economic success of the United States, will require the production of an accurate history, a new memory of our founding, an anamnesis. The stories which we combine into the set of experiences, beliefs, and values that affect the way we as Americans perceive who we are is sometimes called a paradigm. The values or system of thought in a society that are most standard and widely held at a given time. What we all take for granted about our history. Dominant paradigms are shaped both by the community's cultural background and by the context of the historical moment. This nation's founding paradigm is false. A more accurate history will lead us to a new paradigm. This work is called a paradigm shift. The founders of whom we are today as a nation will be all in this story. The indigenous, aboriginal, the native people, the English, the Europeans, and the Africans. What in our racist language would come to be called the red, the white, and the black. And they all must be in this paradigm if it is to approach truth. In this revised paradigm of our founding, some of our civic scripture will maintain its importance. We will continue to quote, just as Martin Luther King Jr. did, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution. However, this new paradigm will always have space to ask, who is this our? Who is in this we? However, when these words were written, the authors were not including Absalom Jones in the we. But it didn't matter to Absalom Jones and other people of African descent. They heard the words. And these words, by their hearing, heeding, an incorporation of them into their lives over the protests in word and deed of the very authors of those words, over the protests of those who continue to believe these words as narrowly as Jefferson and Washington did. A new paradigm will raise up not only these words, but the words of Frederick Douglass. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. What any people will quietly submit to, you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And this will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. This new paradigm is necessary to abolish the artificial concept of race, a construct invented in the 15th and 16th centuries and refined in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries in order to make slavery more efficient by confining, reserving it to Africans and people of African descent, and preserved to the present in order to preserve their descendants in profitable states of discrimination and what we call racism. This new paradigm will not fear the bad news, nor deny it as our heritage whenever we or our parents arrived on these shores. Maya Angelou is correct. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, and if faced with courage, need not be lived again. To do this recalling, this facing with courage, we must confront the horror. In the new paradigm of our founding, we will all acknowledge Native, Aboriginal First Peoples slaughter in order to obtain this land. We will acknowledge Africans worked to death in order to exploit the land for others. And all of this is in the life of Absalom Jones and his family, friends, colleagues, and community. We Episcopalians are privileged to have in our calendar Absalom Jones, a great Christian born into slavery that we can remember like all the others on the calendar, remember especially one day every year. This recognition is a gift to the Church from Black Episcopalians who did not ignore the life of this founder of the first independent congregation of Africans in the Episcopal Church. As is the gift to Methodism in the recognition of Richard Allen by the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And this is why the accuracy of Absalom's biography is so important, why many of us work to have his biography in Lesson, Feast, and Fast revised and corrected. In Absalom's life, we can learn about enslavement and emancipation and liberation, not only in general academic terms, but in the actual lives and experiences of men and women, girls and boys of African descent. Stories like this. When Absalom is brought to Philadelphia by his slave master, he is about 16 years old. About 8 years later, as an adult, still enslaved, he falls in love with another enslaved person, a woman named Mary. who lives nearby. Both are owned by members of the Church of England, and they are allowed by their owners to marry in church. Listen to these words. This is the recorded register of their marriage at St. Peter's Anglican Church. Records from January 4, 1770. Absalom, Negro slave to Mr. Wynkoop, and Mary, slave to S. King, were married by Mr. Duché. Remarkable. This is actually the first official record we have of Absalom being an Episcopalian. And I want you especially to listen to his name. Absalom, her name, Mary. Neither one have recorded last names. Mary, of course, is enslaved. Absalom Jones, as we all remember from our lessons about Absalom, spent the next several years raising money so that he could buy Mary, and by buying Mary, assure that any children from this union would be free. We are called to believe that in Jesus, God definitely entered human life. God became one of us, taking on all the joys and all the pains and struggles of being human. That in Jesus, God became fully human. And when we are called to follow Jesus, we are called also to be fully human, to fully enter human life. God changed the course of human history in Jesus, and in that holy mystery and paradox, we were all changed as well. The perfect example of the change in God as a result of the incarnation is that crucifixion and death of Jesus. While God raised Jesus from the dead at Easter, the resurrection did not erase the crucifixion. The resurrected wounds are a week later shown to Thomas. The power of death was overcome, but it was not made like it never happened. God gives us the good news because there is bad news. As Barbara Harris always reminded us, we are an Easter people in a Good Friday world. As Howard Thurman described this work by some amazing but vastly creative spiritual insight, he writes, the slave undertook the redemption of a religion that the master had profaned in his midst. Pray to Absalom for the knowledge and faith to redeem our church and our society, which has been profaned in our midst. We find in Absalom's life this very work in the lives of those Christians in their daily life and work. Let us have that be a model for us in times like this today. Blessed Absalom, thank you. Show us Jesus.